Chapter 231 Stone Giant. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sonny remained on the swinging hammer of the Colossus for a while, resting and trying to catch his breath. However, very soon, the dark sea rose high enough to make his position perilous. With a deep sigh, he stood up and dislodged the prowling thorn from the stones. Waiting for the Colossus to raise his hand, Sonny jumped down. The wind whistled in his ears, and a few moments later, he landed on the wrist of the giant in a roll. As soon as Sonny got back to his feet, the stone surface beneath plummeted down. Thrusting the kunai in another crack, he gritted his teeth and held on to his dear life. Soon, the ground he was standing on sloped down, and then turned into a vertical wall, with nothing but the dark abyss of the cursed sea visible below. Hanging off that wall, Sonny cursed and waited for the Colossus to bring his arm back up. When it finally happened, Sonny immediately dashed forward. He had several precious seconds before the pendulum swung again, and had to cover as much distance as possible with each swing of the giant's arm. Too slow, and the cursed sea would catch up to him. The closer he got to the elbow of the walking statue, the more inclined his path was. Eventually, Sonny had to climb instead of run. His hands were tired from fighting and supporting his weight, but he stubbornly continued moving forward and up. Once Sonny reached the elbow and climbed higher, the amplitude of the swinging reduced considerably. Now he just had to scale the vertical wall and reach the shoulder of the giant. Climbing the slippery stone was not easy, but he had gotten used to such tasks a long time ago. In any case, it was way better than that time Sonny had to race against the rising sea during a furious storm, only to get swept away by the black water and be saved by Nephis at the last moment. This time, at least, he didn't need her to save his life. That would be embarrassing. Some time later, Sonny climbed over the edge of the circular platform, crawled to its center, and sprawled beside the other members of the cohort, who were waiting for his return with tense expressions on their faces. "Sonny. Are you all right?" Kai was back to his senses, looking a little bit disheveled, but still ridiculously gorgeous. Sonny stared at him in dismay, then sighed. "That I'm alive." A short while later, Nephis called out to him. "What were you fighting?" Sonny grimaced. "A big ugly worm. I threw him back into the water." With that, he reluctantly sat up and looked at the surface of the dark sea, which was already flowing over the shoulders of the stone giant. Its surface was black and tranquil. No one was pursuing them, it seemed. "It's gone now, so rest up. I'll keep watch." He stayed awake until the break of dawn and then woke the members of the cohort. When they rose to their feet, Sonny lay down on the cold stone and tiredly closed his eyes. Yesterday, he had thought that he would not be able to fall asleep atop the walking stone giant. However, Sonny had underestimated how exhausting this long night would end up being. Even the body of a powerful sleeper needed rest. Actually, the swinging of the stone platform was sort of soothing. Soon, he was fast asleep. When Sonny woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. Yawning, he sat up, summoned the endless spring and greedily drank some water. Someone had left a plate of food near him, so without thinking too much, Sonny picked it up and had himself a late breakfast. Ah, that hits the spot. Recognizing the taste of Neff's cooking, he glanced at their intrepid leader and smiled. It was nice to laze around while others were working. While Sonny was sleeping, the stone platform had transformed. Plates of iron stripped of the abominable spiders and stored in Effie's bag were inserted around its perimeter, with the golden rope strung between them as an improvised railing. More of these plates were shaped into makeshift rods and placed in the center to serve as throwing spears in case the cohort was attacked from the air. Currently, Kai and Effie were building additional battlements on the left shoulder of the giant while Nephis observed their progress from above. They were taking no chances. A trip through the labyrinth, no matter how fantastical, was still full of danger. It was better to be safe than sorry. Sonny scoffed. "So much work. What's the wars? No. I'm not going to finish that thought. No thanks. On the stone beside him, the shadow applauded sarcastically. Shaking his head, Sunny finished his food in silence and moved to the edge of the platform to look down at the vista of the forgotten shore. Far below, the landscape of the labyrinth was slowly moving past them. The stone giant was marching south, indifferently crushing mountains of crimson coral under his feet with each step. The view was simultaneously hypnotic and depressing. In every direction, as far away as Sunny could see, there was nothing but red coral, with rare heights protruding from it into the gray skies here and there. The forgotten shore was truly vast. And every inch of it was full of unspeakable dangers. Not too far from him, Castor was also busy studying the landscape. However, his interest wasn't purely idle. Changing Star's map was on the stones beside him, and the proud legacy was drawing new marks on it from time to time. Sunny sighed. The cohort might have caught a ride on the shoulder of the stone giant to reach their destination at the edges of the forgotten shore, but they were going to have to walk all the way back to the Dark City by themselves. That was months of traveling through this treacherous hellscape, with nothing but their own strength and wit to keep them alive. The information Castor was putting on the map today was going to be priceless to them in the future. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, Sunny deserved a little respite. Turning away from the handsome young man, he lowered his gaze and peered at the sights below. It was not every day that one got an opportunity to enjoy a beautiful view of hell. Chapter 232 Before the Storm. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In the next few hours, Sunny did nothing but leisurely gaze at the vistas of the labyrinth. While monotonous, they were still picturesque and breathtaking. The forgotten shore was a harrowing, but beautiful place. The somber gray sky and the black earth created a perfect backdrop for the vibrant crimson sea of twisting coral blades. Here and there, strange landmarks broke the dullness of the landscape, igniting the flames of curiosity in Sunny's heart. After all, he was nothing if not a passionate explorer. Provided, most of his explorations ended with something dying at the end of his blade. But still. Out there in the depths of the labyrinth, Sunny saw many things that piqued his interest. The skeletal remains of colossal monsters, with signs of ferocious battles written in the marks on their bones. Broken wrecks of giant vessels, with terrible breaches in their mighty hulls. Abyssal chasms that were full of darkness and emptiness, leading into the depths of this cursed land where true horrors dwelt. And things he couldn't even describe, let alone identify. He even saw several vast ruins that must have been entire cities once. Now, only unclear shapes of magnificent buildings remained, overgrown with crimson coral and barely resembling anything made by a human hand. He didn't know if they had existed before or simultaneously with the Dark City. Regardless, it seemed that no other human settlement on the forgotten shore had withstood the curse of darkness as the cursed city had. They were all destroyed and devoured, first by the crimson coral, then by the ruthless flow of time. Now, no one was left to remember that these proud cities had ever existed. The 7 heroes that created the Starlight Legion were described as those born in all-consuming darkness. That suggested that humans had resisted the curse for a while, at least. Maybe the Dark City was built long after the darkness had devoured this land, as the last sanctuary and fortress for those who remained. A lot of good had that done, in the end. His reverie was broken by Cassie, who suddenly turned south and frowned. Her quick movement drew everyone's attention. Sunny instantly had a bad feeling. Nephi's turned to the blind girl and frowned. Cassie. Do you feel something? Cassia lingered for a few moments and then said, her voice uncertain. I think a storm is coming. Sunny looked at the sky, which like always was covered in a gray veil of clouds. Nothing seemed to indicate that there was going to be a tempest turning it impenetrably dark and furious soon. But that was just how things worked on the forgotten shore. Storms came out of nowhere and destroyed everyone unfortunate enough to be caught in their murderous embrace. If Cassie said that she felt one approaching, then it was Their oracle had a good track record of sensing such things. Damn. A storm meant that the cursed sea would rise from the depths earlier than usual. It also meant that there would be rain and lightning, which would make the behavior of the dwellers of the depths unpredictable. It also meant hurricane winds, and that was really bad news when you were stuck on a moving colossus 200 meters above the ground. Nephice gritted her teeth. You heard her. Prepare. However, the blind girl interrupted her. Wait. There is something else. Changing Star lingered for a moment, then asked. You are sensing another threat. Cassie scowled, then said in a strange tone. No, not sensing. I can hear something strange. It's like a rustle. Everyone stared at her for a few seconds, trying to understand the meaning behind her words. Strangely, Kai was the first one to react. Suddenly pale, he spun around and summoned his bow. Before anyone could understand what was happening, something whistled in the air, and a dark shape forcefully crashed into the stone platform, smearing it with blood. A black arrow was protruding from its body. Sunny jumped out of the way and gasped, stunned by the force with which the monster impacted against the stone. It had to have been in a long dive before being pierced by Kai's arrow, mere moments away from snatching one of them away. The creature looked somewhat like a giant locust. Its body was covered in black chitin and comparatively small, no bigger than that of an adult human. Its wide wings were thin and transparent. As it convulsed in death throes, the wings moved, threatening to push the members of the cohort off of the platform. Nephice dashed forward, grabbed the disgusting creature and threw it down. Kai was already grabbing another arrow. There was an expression of panic on his face. Sunny blinked. Why is he panicking? The monster is already. As though hearing his thoughts, Kai glanced at the members of the cohort with wide eyes and yelled. Swarms. These fiends hunt in swarms. Get ready. Before he could finish, Sunny was already summoning the Midnight Shard and the Stone Saint. Dead. By now, everyone could hear the rustling sound Cassie had told them about. It seemed to be coming from nowhere, surrounding them like a wave. For a few moments, nothing happened. The members of the cohort tensely stared up. Why? Suddenly, a black dot appeared in the gray clouds and swiftly fell down, covering the distance to the neck of the colossus almost instantly. Before it could attack, though, Effie's spear collided with it. The giant locust practically exploded, sending a rain of blood splattering against the stone back of the colossus. But by the time the huntress dismissed her spear and before she had the time to summon it again, there was another dot, and another, and another. Kai shot one more creature out of the air, while Castor used a strange sling he summoned from his soul sea to break the wings of another. Nephice raised her sword and yelled. Cassie! Wind! Flinching, the blind girl began to call upon her wooden staff. While white sparks of light were still weaving the shape of it in her hands, the quiet dancer flew out of its scabbard by itself and flashed into the air, piercing an approaching locust clean through. A few moments later, a powerful gale shot from the wooden staff into the skies, slowing the attacking locusts down and sending them staggering. One of these stragglers somehow managed to land on the platform and immediately jumped at Sunny. Changing his stance on the fly, Sunny slashed with his sword, decapitating the repulsive creature. However, because of the inertia, the massive body continued to move forward, slamming into him at great speed. With a curse, Sunny flew back and fell over the railing. Sliding on the stone, he rolled down to the stone giant's shoulder and caught himself on the part of the defensive fence built by Effie and Kai. Then, he stood up and spat a mouthful of blood. A moment later, Sunny froze, his eyes widening. Because of the tumble, he accidentally looked down to the ground. What he saw there made him shiver. Numerous dark shapes were appearing from the labyrinth and jumping at the colossus, swiftly climbing up his giant stone body. Chapter 233 Swarm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As the members of the cohort killed several giant locusts, their repulsive black bodies fell to the ground, raining blood on the walking colossus and the crimson coral of the labyrinth. As soon as their corpses hit the ground, it suddenly moved. Dark figures appeared from beneath the mud, rushing at the dead locusts to devour them. Hundreds of monsters were suddenly competing for the few scraps of meat. After several bloody fights broke out and the winners were decided, those who had not gotten to satiate their hunger turned their heads and followed the smell of blood. Right back to the moving stone giant. Looking down with dark resentment, Sunny saw numerous creatures jumping at the legs of the walking statue from the mounds of coral and quickly climbing up. They were headed right to where the cohort was being besieged by the swarm of winged abominations. He couldn't see the shape of them clearly, but there was no doubt that these monsters were bad news. Damnation! Slain an awakened beast, Flesh Reaver. Your shadow grows stronger. Turning around, Sunny summoned the prowling thorn and hurled it upward. A moment later, using the invisible string as support, he was flying through the air. Grabbing onto the edge of the circular platform, he hoisted himself up and once again faced the carnage. The kunai flashed, cutting the wing of one of the locusts clean off. Suddenly crippled, the creature toppled and plummeted down, no doubt to be devoured by the horde of nightmare creatures approaching from below. The battle with the swarm was not going too great for the cohort. The turbulent winds summoned by Cassie's staff bought them some breathing room by making it hard for the locusts to approach the platform at high speed, but there were just too many of them. Kai was setting one arrow after another loose. After that one first shot, he had not used the blood arrow, choosing instead to rely on his mundane ones. In the chaotic mess of this sudden battle, it was too easy to miss. Plus, he didn't need a lot of power to deliver debilitating wounds to the locusts. They were basically skewering themselves on the arrows themselves by diving from the skies with incredible speed. Still, the abominable reavers were awakened beasts. It wasn't easy for a sleeper to kill one with just a single shot. Just as Sunny grabbed the kunai and spun to avoid a glancing blow from one of the creatures, another one landed on the platform. 2 arrows were sticking from its cracked chitin, but the locust was still alive. Not for long, though. Just a moment after the repulsive bug landed, Nef's sword flashed through the air, slicing it in half. Sending the mangled body off the platform with a powerful kick, Changing Star turned to Kai and yelled. Don't try to kill them. Break their wings. With a sudden light of understanding in his eyes, the archer changed his approach. Indeed, that made sense. The members of the cohort didn't need to slay the locusts. They just needed to make it so the flying scourges weren't able to reach the stone platform. Effie, meanwhile, did not need this advice. Everything she hit simply exploded into a disgusting puddle of bloody goo. The problem the huntress faced was that there was no powerful range weapon she could use. Her beautiful spear was not really suited to be thrown that often. The memories were created from soul essence. Once a memory was dismissed, that essence returned to the core of the awakened that had summoned it. However, if it was too far away from them, the essence was simply wasted, unless the memory had a special enchantment like that of the blood arrow. The essence wasn't lost forever, as it would slowly accumulate inside the soul core until the peak capacity was reached once again. But this process took time, so one could not endlessly throw their memories at the enemy during a battle. Especially not once they reached a rank where managing one's soul essence was of higher importance. Effie had not reached such a rank yet, but she was still limited by that principle. That's why she resorted to using makeshift darts fashioned out of plates of spider iron. There wasn't much of them left, however. Once the last dart was gone, she would have to either exhaust her pool of soul essence or risk fighting the attacking locusts in melee. Just like the Stone Saint was doing right now. As Sunny rushed toward Nephis, he noticed the shadow lowering her shoulder and raising her shield. In the next moment, one of the repulsive creatures crashed into it at full speed, and simply crumbled, black blood exploding into the air through the cracks in the shattered chitin. You have slain. The huntress, however, did not have the benefit of weighing a literal ton. Despite her graceful appearance, the saint was made out of stone, and stone was much heavier than flesh. It was also much harder to rip and slice apart. Once Effie was forced to fight the locusts with nothing but her spear and shield, her life would be in real danger. Curses, curses, curse it all. Swiftly approaching Changing Star, Sunny kicked a disgusting piece of a killed creature off the platform and yelled. "We have a problem." Nephi's sharply looked at him and scowled. "What?" Sunny hesitated for a moment, and then gestured down. "There's a couple of hundred labyrinth creatures crawling all over the Colossus. They'll be here pretty soon." Nephis gritted her teeth, then glanced at the members of the cohort. Cassie was holding the wooden staff, sending powerful bursts of wind into the sky to slow down the attacking swarm. The quiet dancer was flashing through the air, protecting her from the locusts to the best of its ability. Castor was spinning his strange sling, aiming at the wings of the repulsive creatures. His face was calm and grim. Everyone was barely holding on and one mistake away from death. With a dark look in her cold gray eyes, Nephis looked at Sunny. "Then," she said. "Come with me, then." Chapter 234 Horde. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Briefly giving Castor a few instructions, Nephis walked over to the edge of the platform and looked down. When she saw the numerous creatures climbing the stone giant, a grim expression appeared on her face. Sunny weighed the prowling thorn in his hand and asked. "So, what's the plan?" Changing Star glanced at him and smiled darkly. "What else? Kill as many as you can." With that, she jumped down and landed softly on the shoulder of the Colossus. With a sigh, Sunny followed. Figures. A moment later, they separated. Nephis dashed to the opposite side of the moving statue, running on the wide stone path of its collar. She was going to try and deal with those creatures that were climbing the front and the left side of the giant. Sunny was going to have to stop those coming from the right and the back. He wasn't sure that just two of them were going to be enough to cover all that space, but they didn't have a lot of choices. Sunny and Nephis at least had the high ground advantage against the enemy. Those fighting against the swarm of monstrous locusts, however, did not. The cohort couldn't spare anyone else for this task. Looking down, he was finally able to discern the shape of the attacking labyrinth dwellers. They looked like massive primates covered in dirty, gray fur. Their arms were strong and muscular, easily pulling their heavy bodies up the ancient stone surface. Each had a mouth full of sharp teeth, with two curved tusks protruding from it, as long as daggers. The most disturbing fact about these beasts was that there were crimson flowers growing from within the bloody gaps in their flesh. Some even had pale stems slithering from one eye socket to another. With a shiver, Sunny realized that this tribe of nightmare creatures were simply hosts for a different, much more terrifying one. The primates were nothing but meat puppets for those ghoulish flowers. Oh gods! Summoning the ordinary rock, Sunny wrapped his body in the shadow, strained his muscles, and threw it down as hard as he could. The small rock plunged through the air and collided with one of the creatures far below, hitting it right in the forehead and splitting its rotten skull apart. Not paying any attention to the fact that half of its head was missing, the primate continued climbing up. Sunny gritted his teeth and dismissed the rock. Just as I thought. Nothing could ever be simple on the Forgotten Shore. The cohort would never be just attacked by a swarm of flying abominations. There had to be a horde of monstrous primates attacking them from the ground, too. And gods forbid those powerful beasts were not parasitized by even more ghastly horrors. At least their bodies are not so tough due to their partially decomposed state. That was something he could work with. Just as the first primate climbed into the range of the prowling thorn, something thundered above Sunny, and in the next moment, he was doused from head to toe in fetid black blood. A mangled corpse of a giant locust flew past him and fell down. Sunny frozen for a second, then growled. I am a walking target now, aren't I? Well, great. Let them come. The more, the merrier. Extending the invisible string to its maximum length, Sunny aimed and hurled the kunai down. He guided it by ever so slightly pulling on the string. The dagger flashed through the air and spun, drawing a curved path. A few moments later, it cut across the wrist of one of the menacing primates, cleanly severing its hand. Suddenly losing purchase, the beast instantly fell down. After plummeting from the deadly height, it hit the crimson corals below and practically exploded into bloody chunks. Sunny listened to the emptiness, a tense expression on his face. "You have slain an awakened monster, Blood Flower. Your shadow grows stronger." A relieved expression appeared on his face. At least these things weren't indestructible. Raising a hand, he caught the returning kunai and instantly threw it again. There wasn't much time left. Countless beasts were climbing up the stone body of the ancient colossus, covering a frightening amount of distance with each second. He had to slaughter as many of them as he could before they reached the battlement constructed on the giant's shoulder, or else they were going to rip him apart. In the next few minutes, Sunny did nothing but control the prowling thorn as it flew through the air, cutting through flesh and bone alike. The heavy kunai never stayed in his hand for more than a second, reaping a bountiful harvest of lives. More than a dozen beasts, those who were ahead of the approaching horde, were thrown off the statue and fell to their deaths, rewarding Sunny with an enviable amount of shadow fragments. However, he was still too slow. Sunny had to be both swift and precise when throwing the dagger, lest he wanted to be pulled off the giant's swaying shoulder himself. What's worse, he had to constantly pay attention to the sky and dodge the attacking locusts when they dove from above to devour him. The horde of terrible beasts was getting closer and closer, their arrival as inevitable as it would be fatal. The situation got even worse when another group of them reached the gargantuan statue's back. Now, Sunny not only had to deal with the monsters climbing its side, but also rush from his perch on the shoulder of the steadily moving colossus to the treacherous path of his collar to prevent the fastest climbers from reaching too high. Bad, this is bad. Covered in blood and with his muscles burning, Sunny continued to slaughter the ghastly beasts as fast as he could. But he wasn't fast enough. At some point, Sunny realized that the climbing monstrosities were now mere meters away from him. He could see every disturbing detail of their rotting bodies, with strangely graceful flowers growing from the bloody gaps. Their crimson petals trembled as they smelled prey. Suddenly, one of the primates strained its powerful legs and jumped into the air, instantly covering the remaining distance to Sunny's position. Before it could land, however, the midnight shard slashed the creature across its massive body, cutting it apart. What flowed out of the terrible wound, however, was not blood, but a vast cloud of red pollen. Before Sunny could register the fact, he had already breathed in a whole lungful of it. His eyes widened. Oh no. This is not good. Chapter 235 Flower Boy. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As the red pollen settled in his lungs, Sunny suddenly sensed something subtly moving inside them. Then, a wave of excruciating pain pierced his chest. With a loud scream, he fell to his knees and grabbed at the puppeteer's shroud. A stream of blood escaped from his mouth and splashed on the ancient stone. In it, tiny blooms were sprouting roots, greedily drinking the crimson liquid and growing with visible speed. Looking at them with dark resentment, Sunny gritted his teeth and slowly stood up. By the time he straightened his back, the pain had subsided a little. The bloodthirsty flowers were already turning black and dying, destroyed by the odd blessing of the blood weave. The insidious nightmare creature tried to devour him from inside, but really, it just signed its own death sentence. In a few short minutes, it would be destroyed completely by the furnace of his tenacious body. And even if some part of it survived, Nef's purifying flames were going to finish the job. Until then, he would just have to endure this torture. Come closer, you bastards. As the midnight shard appeared in his hands, another monster was already climbing onto the shoulder of the walking colossus. Lunging forward, Sunny brandished his sword and decapitated the foul creature, then kicked it in the chest to send it flying down. A moment later, he jumped back, narrowly avoiding being grabbed by another primate. Before the beast could even react, the razor-sharp Tachi flashed across its body, severing both of its arms. More red pollen burst into the air. Holding his breath, Sunny shifted his stance and attacked once again in one swift, fluid motion. The midnight shard pierced the knee of the massive primate, making it topple. The creature wasn't dead, but any kind of mobility it once had was pretty much gone. Good enough. But it didn't really matter. 3 other monsters were already there, ready to take the fallen creature's place. And a few seconds later, there was going to be even more of them, and then even more still, until, eventually, Sunny was torn apart by the unstoppable flood of these harrowing fiends. He would have to think of something before that happened. If only I could breathe. Fighting through the excruciating pain that was tearing him from inside, Sunny grimaced and dashed forward to face the enemies. In the next minute or so, he forced himself to cut out all unnecessary thoughts, turning into a ruthless hurricane of steel. The midnight shard danced from one nightmare creature to another, piercing, slashing, and severing their rotting flesh. The air was soon obscured by a vast cloud of red pollen. At some point, Sunny gritted his teeth and disengaged from the fight, leaving a carpet of bleeding bodies in his wake. Launching himself back a few meters, he slid on the stone and left the cloud of red mist. Only then, finally, he allowed himself to draw in a deep breath. Sensing that their enemy was gone, the primates rushed forward. However, a moment later, something glistened in the mist, and a heavy triangular blade suddenly pierced the head of the leading creature. The blood flower did not react to its host being damaged and continued its lunge. But in the next second, the head of the monstrous ape was violently jerked backward, and, losing balance, it fell down. The string of the prowling thorn was coiled around the support pillars of the makeshift battlement, creating an invisible trap. By moving forward with the kunai still stuck in its skull, the unfortunate creature pulled the string taut, causing an invisible net to rise into the air. Entangled in it, half a dozen creatures tumbled to the ground, blocking the others from pursuing Sunny. Neither the battlement nor the invisible string were going to last long, but at least it bought him a few seconds. You have slain an awakened monster, Blood Flower. Your shadow, finally. The nightmare creature in his lungs was finally dead. Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Sunny groaned, wiped his lips, and glanced back. What he saw made him curse. The group of monstrous primates climbing the back of the colossus was about to reach the collar of the stone tunic. Sunny was about to be surrounded. And he was all out of ideas. If I die today, I am at least going to drag as many of you as possible with me into a deeper, darker hell. Prepare yourselves, gangrels. Lunging forward, he ran on the narrow stone path and got to the middle of the giant's back just in time to collide with the first of the advancing primates and send it flying all the way down to the distant surface of the labyrinth. Unlike the shoulder of the colossus, Sunny had no room to maneuver on the narrow path. In fact, he was having trouble simply keeping his balance due to the constant swaying. But the primates, with their wide shoulders and mighty frames, were in an even worse situation than him. On that narrow stone path, one man would be able to stop an entire army. Provided that nothing attacked him from behind, of course. Which was bound to happen. Cursing, Sunny slashed and slashed, sending one monster tumbling down in a billowing cloud of red pollen after another. Despite all his efforts, he had to retreat step after step to avoid being surrounded and killed by the ferocious abominations. The situation was becoming desperate. Especially so because the creatures that had been slowed down for a bit by the string of the prowling thorn finally wrestled free of it, and were seconds away from reaching his current position. Damnation! Sending a primate that was facing him staggering with a devastating blow of the midnight shard, Sunny desperately spun to deflect the attack from the creature approaching him from the back. However, he was a fraction of a second too late. Realizing that he won't be able to block or dodge the paw of the monstrous ape, Sunny feverishly tried to come up with a way to minimize the damage, at least. But just as the claws of the creature were about to grab onto his neck, a swift shadow suddenly fell from the skies. Catching the primate with its sharp mandibles, one of the locusts easily tore its head off and dashed back, devouring the prey with terrifying speed as it flew. In the next moment, more flesh weavers fell from the skies, aiming at the climbing primates. The two tribes of nightmare creatures were suddenly locked in a ferocious battle, with the 6 humans hopelessly stuck in between. Chapter 236 Ex Machina. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. With his back to the stone surface of the ancient statue, Sunny stared as the two tribes of nightmare creatures clashed in a cacophony of eerie roars and rustling noises. Discovering a new target, swarming locusts swiftly fell from the skies and cut into the horde of the blood flower hosts, devouring scores of unfortunate primates in mere moments. Torn and eviscerated by the sharp mandibles, their flesh seemed to almost melt in the terrible maws of the flying abominations. However, the massive beasts were not entirely defenseless. Any locust that lingered for a fraction of a second more than it should have was immediately grabbed and torn to pieces by the powerful primates, its black blood falling like dew on the petals of the crimson flowers that grew from their rotting bodies. Some hosts even jumped off the colossus to grab onto diving reavers and tumble together to the distant ground. In just a few seconds, the surface of the ancient giant and the air around him was consumed by utter chaos. Indifferent to everything, the colossus steadily marched south. Come to your senses. Shaking off his astonishment, Sunny swiftly finished off the primate that he had staggered a second before and pushed the heavy creature from the narrow path. Despite the fact that their enemies were now fighting each other, the pressure on the cohort did not decrease. In fact, it only grew heavier. Cursing under his breath, Sunny threw the midnight shard at another lunging monster, turned his back to the enemies, and jumped. Grabbing onto a crack in the ancient stone, he pulled his body up and nimbly scaled the neck of the ancient statue. For several seconds that seemed to last an eternity, Sunny was completely defenseless against the potential attacks by the monstrous locusts. However, to his luck, Nephis had chosen that exact moment to unleash her flames on the other side of the statue. A blinding flash of white drowned the skies for a second, confusing the reavers and buying him enough time to reach the stone platform. Climbing over its edge, Sunny rolled away and sprawled on the cold stone, trying to catch his breath. His body was in agony. The blood weave might have destroyed the flower growing in his lungs, but the damage was already done. Sunny had trouble breathing and felt bloody foam bubbling on his lips. Every time he inhaled, a sharp pain pierced his entire being. Not too terrible. Although troublesome, these wounds were not going to kill him. Sleepers healed better and faster than mundane humans, and Sunny in particular was also transformed by the drop of Weaver's ichor, making him much tougher and harder to kill than most. Sort of like a cockroach. As for the pain, he had been through worse and survived. As long as Sunny had adrenaline numbing it to some degree, he was capable of giving a fight still. Not that it would be pleasant. With a moan, Sunny picked himself up from the ground and looked around. Things were slowly turning from bad to worse. Kai was long out of arrows and had to resort to using his morbid ascended memory. Judging by how pale his face was, he had already missed a few shots, losing a lot of blood as the result. Cassie was still trying to maintain the powerful winds that slowed the attacking locusts down, but her face and hands were covered in blood. It seemed that even the powerful enchantment of her armor and the ardent protection of the quiet dancer were not enough to fully save her from harm. Effie was now fighting the flying abominations in melee, having only a fraction of a second to react every time they attacked her. Blood was streaming down her legs, her white chiton torn and soaked with it. Her bronze helmet was gone, lying shattered on the stones. Castor did not seem to be wounded, but his face was dark with exhaustion. Maintaining his incredible speed was taxing on both the mind and the body, so he would not be able to last much longer either. The Stone Saint was the Stone Saint. The taciturn shadow was covered in black blood from head to toe and completely indifferent to it, which only enhanced her dark and menacing visage. She continued to move with elegant grace, protecting the members of the cohort to the best of her ability. But she couldn't be everywhere all at once. And then there was Sunny himself, who was in the worst shape out of all of them by far. Curses. And the worst news was that now that he had to retreat back to the platform, the abominable primates were about to follow him, forcing the cohort to defend itself from two sides simultaneously. Even worse still, unlike Sunny, the other members didn't have blood weave to protect them from the red pollen. Bad, bad, this is bad. Just as Sunny was thinking that thought, a bloodied hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the platform. A moment later, Nephi slid under the golden rope and shakily rose to her feet. Changing Star had white flames dancing in her eyes. Her skin seemed to shine with a soft glow, as though there was fire burning beneath it. That fire, if Sunny had to guess, was responsible for annihilating the red pollen as soon as it entered her body. The Starlight Legion armor was heavily damaged and seemed to be on the verge of melting, but still held, protecting the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan to the end. Not paying any attention to the members of the cohort, Nephis turned her head and looked south. What is she? Before Sunny could finish the thought, he was distracted by the sight of an ugly primate head rising above the edge of the circular platform. Cursing, he grabbed a jagged piece of chitin laying nearby and shoved it into the creature's eyes, forcibly pushing it back down. At the same moment, an especially large locust suddenly fell from the sky. Batting the quiet dancer away, it dove right for Cassie. Before anyone could react, its mandibles clicked. However, instead of soft flesh, all they caught was the hard wood of the enchanted staff. The blind girl had managed to defend herself at the last moment. The impact was still strong enough to throw her far back, nevertheless. Breaking the improvised barrier with her back, Cassie screamed, and slipped from the platform, plummeting down like a broken doll. No, the prowling thorn was damaged and restoring itself in the Soul Sea, and the golden rope was tied around the platform. He didn't know what to. As the sound of a bough clattering on the stone reached his ears, Sunny saw Kai diving down from the neck of the Colossus. Flying with incredible speed, he caught up with Cassie and grabbed her by the arm. The two of them froze in the air for a moment, absolutely defenseless against the approaching locusts. No, but the fatal attack never came. Suddenly, the cacophony of the battle died down, turning into deathly silence. Sunny blinked. Several locusts were hovering in the air mere meters away from Cassie and Kai, but they were in no hurry to devour the helpless humans. In fact, they, too, seemed frozen. A moment later, the locusts suddenly turned around and dashed away. In fact, the whole swarm was swiftly retreating, flying away from the stone colossus with as much speed as the gluttonous abominations could muster. It was as if they were fleeing from something. Many of the locusts were carrying dead primates in their claws. It seemed as though the Reavers were the ultimate victors in this terrible battle against the monstrous apes. But Sunny was pretty sure that, soon, the whole tribe of these terrible creatures was going to have crimson blooms growing from the cracks in their chitin. Blood flowers were truly a horrifying enemy. Who knew what they would be capable of after subjugating a whole swarm of flying abominations? The more pressing question, however, was, what were the locusts running from? Sunny looked down, only to realize that the giant primates were also retreating, rushing down the body of the ancient statue in something that almost resembled panic. Then, finally, he turned and looked south, following the line of Changing Star's gaze. His face paled. Out there, directly in the path of the walking statue, an inconceivably vast wall of furious darkness had devoured the whole world. It was swiftly moving in their direction, bolts of lightning illuminating the raging depths of clouds almost every second. The storm was approaching. Chapter 237 Wall of Darkness. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Kai landed on the stone platform, gently placing Cassie down. The blind girl was deathly pale and visibly hurt, but her life didn't seem to be in danger. The archer smiled reassuringly and gripped her shoulder. Then, just like the rest of them, he turned his head and silently looked south. A wall of impenetrable, furious darkness was approaching from there, devouring vast spans of the labyrinth with each second. To Sunny, it felt like an endless ocean of deranged shadows was rushing to drown them. The pressure he felt was almost as bad as that of the ominous Crimson Spire. The Colossus was marching toward the darkness, completely indifferent to its menacing oppression. The wind rustled Sunny's hair. In the stunned silence, Effie suddenly fell to her knees with a pained groan. Her hands were pressed against the breach in her archaic cuirass, bright blood streaming from beneath them. That sound brought everyone back to reality. With a grim expression on her face, Nephice walked over to the wounded huntress and gently placed her hands on her body. A moment later, soft white radiance shone through the cracks of Effie's armor, healing her wounds and taking the pain away. Changing Star closed her eyes and bit her lip, drops of crimson blood rolling down her ivory skin. To take away her companion's suffering, she had to endure a much more harrowing torture. Sunny coughed, bloody foam flying from his lips, and weakly lowered himself to the ground. He didn't feel too well. The wall of darkness was growing closer with every moment. The wind was picking up, whistling in the cracks of the ancient statue. It brought the smell of the sea with it. Sunny grimaced and commanded the stone saint to walk over and stand above him. "What are we going to do now?" Kai shivered, glanced at the raging wall of clouds, and said, "Climb lower. The lightning is bound to be drawn to the neck of this giant." Sunny shook his head. "We can't. The sea is going to rise, so most of the statue will be submerged underwater. We will be lucky if the waves aren't high enough to reach this platform." The archer sighed and looked down. "So then, we're dead." Sunny smiled darkly. "Don't worry. Stone doesn't conduct electricity too well, so we will be safe from lightning. Most likely. What you should really be afraid of are the things that all that commotion might attract." After that, he bent over in another fit of painful coughing. "Ugh, that stings a little." By that time, Nephice was done healing Effie. Walking over, she kneeled and looked at Sunny. Unexpectedly, there was an expression of sincere worry on her face. Did you inhale that pollen?" Sunny tried to grin, but ended up coughing up more blood instead. "Yeah. A little. But don't fret, it's not, there are no flowers growing in my lungs. Anymore." Neff's face twitched, and she outstretched her hands to place them on Sunny's chest. However, he caught them in the air with his own and stopped her. Her skin was soft and cool to the touch. "Don't bother. I'll be fine. Take a look at Cassie instead." Changing Star stared at him for a few moments. Then, she suddenly asked, "But doesn't it hurt?" He pushed her hands away and shook his head. "Not as bad as it going to hurt you." Nephice frowned. "That I am used to it." Sunny looked at her for a long time, his expression hard to read. Then, he said evenly, "I know. But I don't want you to be used to it. You shouldn't be. Especially not on my account." The weight of the things he left unsaid hung between them for a few moments. Nephice titled her head slightly, then turned away. Finally, she sighed, lingered for a few seconds, and walked away without saying another word. Sunny lowered his head and remained motionless for a while. It's better this way. Being afraid of pain was the most human emotion there was. He couldn't help but feel that every time Nephice silently endured the terrifying torture of her flaw, a part of her humanity was burned away by the merciless purity of the radiant white flames. He didn't want to see it happen. Not to mention that he was the last person in the world that Changing Star should have been helping. Because suddenly, a deafening thunderclap rolled over them, forcing the members of the cohort to flinch. The light of day dimmed, and the cold wind furiously crashed into them, bearing drops of salty black water with it. Done checking up on Cassie, Nephice glanced forward and scowled. They were almost out of time. "Get ready. Hold." With that, she summoned her sword and held it with both hands. As the incandescent light ignited the silver blade, Changing Star thrust the sword deep into the stone, melting it. Kneeling down, she gripped the sword and prepared for the onslaught of the storm. But Effie sighed and grabbed onto a crack in the stone with one hand. With the other, she drew Cassie close and hugged her. Castor followed their leader's example and used his enchanted Jian to anchor himself to the platform. Sunny glanced at them and grimaced. Standing above him, the stone saint discarded her shield and lowered one shoulder, preparing to withstand the hurricane winds. Without anything better to hold on to, Sunny hugged the thigh of his shadow and closed his eyes, embarrassed by the indignity. Before he could really revel in it, though, something plopped on the ground near him. Opening one eye, Sunny was surprised to see Kai. What? What are you doing here? The archer smiled with embarrassment and coughed. Well, you see. I don't have a sword that can cut stone or Herculean strength. So, mind if I hold on to the other thigh of your beautiful stone companion? Sunny glared at him for a couple of seconds and then scoffed. Fine. Whatever. Just don't grab onto me by mistake. As the endless wall of darkness approached, the headless colossus steadily walked forward and then dove straight into the furious embrace of the harrowing storm. Chapter 238 Into the Storm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A stray drop of rain fell on Sunny's cheek. The howling of the wind grew louder. A moment later, the whole world suddenly darkened, and he was assaulted by a furious gale. The water pelted him in the face, drowning the cursed. Sunny was about to yell. Damn! The storm descended on them with terrifying violence. The corpses of repulsive locusts that were left on the platform suddenly moved. Then, picked up by the wind, they were thrown off the neck of the steadily walking colossus, disappearing into the darkness. Their black blood was washed away by the torrent of rain. A blinding flash of lightning pierced the veil of clouds, followed by a deafening thunderclap. As the stone became slippery and wet, Sunny felt his body being forcefully pushed away from its surface by the gale. Gripping the stone saint tighter, he gasped and grimaced. Pain pierced his damaged lungs. Worst amusement ride ever. Fortunately, the heavy shadow was not moved by the tremendous pressure of the hurricane. Firmly planting herself on the surface of the platform, she turned her torso and lowered a shoulder, cutting the wind with her solid stone body. To her side, Nephice, Castor, and Effie were desperately holding on against the assault of the hurricane. With some effort, they were also able to resist it. But the worst was still to come. Hidden from the sun, the dark sea was rising from the depths. Sunny could hear the deep rumbling of the black water rushing through the twisting passages of the labyrinth and washing over the mounds of crimson coral. Soon, the stone giant was walking through it, creating a furious whirlpool with each step of his gargantuan feet. Another lightning tore the skies apart, illuminating the world made of nothing but wind, water, and darkness. Hit by an especially violent gust of wind, the stone saint slid a few centimeters back and sent Sunny's heart into a momentary panic. The stone giant walked forward. After a while, the black water covered his knees, then his abdomen, then his chest. Following a long and torturous span of time spent holding onto the shadow and enduring the onslaught of the storm, Sunny saw the raging waves flowing over the broken battlements on the shoulder of the ancient statue. His face became grim. During the previous night, the dark sea had not risen high enough to reach the stone platform they were sheltering on. However, with how high the waves were, things were bound to change. As though answering his thoughts, a massive wave crashed into the neck of the colossus, washing over the platform. The members of the cohort were hit by a wall of blackness and instantly drenched from head to toe in salty seawater. Luckily, no one was washed away, for now. The howling wind, the furious onslaught of rain, the constant flashes of lightning and the violent cacophony of thunderclaps were already enough to instill in them the feeling that the whole world was about to split apart and crumble. With the dark waves rising to strike at the stone platform over and over again, the situation became truly disastrous. And yet, they held on. Minute after minute, against all odds, the 6 humans clung to the ancient stone, refusing to be taken away by the raging tempest. Sunny didn't know how much time had passed or how far the stone giant had walked into the depths of the storm, but there was no sign of it growing weaker. In fact, it was only becoming more ferocious and terrible. However, this wasn't even what he was really afraid of. His true fear hid not in the skies that had gone mad, but in the lightless depths of the cursed sea. And soon, inevitably, his worst fears came true. With a harrowing sense of premonition, Sunny suddenly lowered his head and gazed down, as though trying to see through the mass of ancient stone. Deep beneath them, he felt a gargantuan shadow rising from the depths. One of the unspeakable terrors of the dark sea was crawling from whatever abyss that had spawned it to face the marching colossus. Curse it all! Looking up, Sunny saw Kai desperately clinging to the stone saint beside him. For once, the archer did not seem dazzling. He was just wet, pale, and scared out of his wits. Behind him, Nephis was kneeling on the stones, gripping the hilt of her silver sword, her fingers white and bloodless. Straining his hurting lungs, Sunny yelled. "Be ready. The do." However, before he could finish, her eyes suddenly grew wide. Swiftly turning around, Sunny saw a gargantuan tentacle slowly rising from the seething waves. Illuminated by a flash of lightning, it looked like a tall, grotesque black tower. It pierced the skies and froze for a moment, looming over the ancient colossus. Feeling his heart skip a bit, Sunny realized that he knew the sight of it. This was the same gigantic black tentacle he saw on his first night on the Forgotten Shore, the one that had effortlessly pulled the enormous monstrous shark under the waves and tore it in halves like a little fish. The abomination that even corrupted nightmare creatures were afraid of. Falling from above, the gargantuan tentacle crashed on the moving statue and coiled itself around its neck. Oh no! Before Sunny could react, the gigantic tentacle was already wrapped around the neck of the colossus. Its bulbous flesh suddenly contracted, as though trying to strangle the stone giant. And pulled him beneath the waves. Without ever slowing down, the ancient statue continued to walk forward. Then, in a roar of falling water, its colossal hand rose from the depths of the cursed sea and grabbed onto the tentacle. Grasping it in his stone fist, the colossus lingered for a moment, and easily tore the tentacle apart. Sunny's eyes widened that one part of the gigantic black tentacle convulsed and slid off the neck of the ancient colossus, falling into the raging waves. The other part stubbornly tried to coil around his arm, but was pushed away by the stone palm and disappeared back into the depths of the cursed sea. For a few moments, the black water was silent. Oh! Gods! And then, the whole surface of it suddenly exploded into the skies. Chapter 239 Clash of Titans. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The surface of the cursed sea seethed and boiled, then exploded into the skies. Following the disappearance of the gargantuan tentacle, 6 others appeared from beneath the black waves. They rose and loomed above the marching colossus like twisted mountains, blocking the clamor of the storm for a fleeting moment. Sunny gritted his teeth and stared at the terrible image, trying to comprehend the scale of the approaching battle. How were tiny humans supposed to survive the fight between titans? A second later, the tentacles collapsed from the skies to assail the stone giant. Because of their size, it seemed as if they were moving in slow motion. However, Sunny knew that it was just an illusion. 4 of the arms of the unseen Leviathan submerged back under the water to coil around the legs and the torso of the Colossus, while 2 remaining ones slithered toward his hand. The ancient statue continued to walk south, seemingly unperturbed by the furious assault of the terrifying dweller of the depths. It batted one of the tentacles away, and allowed the other to wrap around its wrist. Hold fast. Sunny didn't register whose shout that was, but followed the advice and grabbed onto the stone saint even tighter. Curse it all! In the furious roar of thunder and blinding lightning, the stone giant suddenly staggered and slightly careened to the side. The tentacle that was coiled around his wrist had tensed, trying to pull the hand down. The power hiding in its black, oily, bulbous flesh was so harrowing that several cracks appeared on the surface of the ancient stone. It almost looked as though the wrist of the Colossus was going to snap and explode into a torrent of shards. Instead, the giant turned his palm and grasped the tentacle, then squeezed it in an obliterating grip. Lo, the tentacle was trying to crush the ancient stone while being crushed in the fist of the stone giant in return. For a few moments, it wasn't clear which creature was more devastatingly powerful. But then the fingers of the Colossus slowly submerged into the black flash, sending rivers of dark, fetid blood spilling down into the sea. Soon, the tentacle was torn to shreds and had to retreat. However, the other 5 were already attacking the Colossus from below. Sunny couldn't see through the black waters of the cursed sea, but he could vividly imagine 2 of them coiling around the legs of the ancient statue, 2 wrapping around its torso, and another one holding down the hand and the mason's hammer. Whatever the gigantic tentacles were doing seemed to have worked. The pace of the walking statue slowed, as if it had to struggle against an unimaginable weight that was dragging it back. The Colossus staggered once more, then suddenly lurched forward, and finally stopped. Not good. Through the soles of his feet, Sunny could feel the vibrations running through the ancient stone. The giant was trembling, as if straining to move his colossal body with all his strength. The circular platform they were hiding on slowly began to slope to the side, allowing even more waves to wash over it. The furious storm grew even stronger, as though celebrating the battle between 2 enormous creatures. The hurricane wind crushed into the cohort, pelting them with rain and seawater. The thunderclaps merged into one continuous, deafening roar, and the flashes of lightning were surrounding them like a net woven from celestial flame. Suddenly, the ancient statue shuddered and changed its angle. It was almost as if the Colossus was bending his waist and leaning forward. Sunny's eyes widened. He instinctively understood what was about to happen. He wasn't the only one. As the stone saint followed his command and fell to her knees to thrust a hand into a crack in the stone, Nephi screamed. "We're going under. Hold your breaths. Here we go again." In the next second, the Colossus leaned forward and dove under the turbulent surface of the waves. Sunny barely had time to inhale deeply. Then, the cohort was once again in the cold embrace of the cursed sea. Only, unlike the previous day when they had to cross the canyon, this time they were being pulled deep into the void of darkness instead of across it. Feeling a powerful current rush past him, Sunny held on for his dear life and waited. If he was right about what the Colossus was doing, they still had a chance to survive. As the pressure of the black water grew heavier and the cold of the lightless void seeped into his bones, the circular platform suddenly stopped and swayed lightly. Despite being submerged deep underwater, Sunny could hear a loud, indescribable sound spreading through the vast expanse of the cursed sea. Gods, gods. Even though he knew that the gods were dead, he couldn't help but call out to them. But all that answered him was silence. Then, finally, the body of the Colossus swayed once more, and suddenly began to move up. With the same speed that they were pulled into the depths, the cohort was now being lifted from the darkness of the cursed sea back into the furious embrace of the storm. Sunny was barely conscious by the time the shoulders of the Colossus broke the surface of the water and the circular platform appeared above the waves. Glancing around, he counted the members of the cohort and made sure that no one was washed away during this harrowing dive. Then, he steeled himself and turned his head to peer forward. The ancient giant had not been pulled into the black water by the unseen horror of the depths. Instead, once the gigantic tentacles had proven to be a nuisance, he had simply leaned forward, and scooped the abyssal creature from the bottom of the sea. And now the Colossus was holding it in his hand, rising the Leviathan into the raging skies. Even knowing that gazing upon the true appearance of the horror of the depths was not the safest of ideas, Sunny couldn't help but look. What he saw made him shiver. Chapter 240 Shadow Slave. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Held in the ancient statue's hand was a gargantuan skull that looked almost like that of a human, but simultaneously vastly different. Apart from the size, the shape of it was all wrong. If Sunny had to describe what exactly was different about it, he would have trouble putting it into words, but everything about the skull screamed of wrongness, malignity, and evil. The vile aura it radiated was almost palpable to the touch. Sunny suddenly felt nauseous and weak, as if just looking at the gargantuan skull was seeping the life out of him. This sensation was somewhat similar to that he had experienced when trying to read the runes describing the unknown, only magnified by 1,000 times. The most prominent and obvious difference, though, was that the gargantuan skull had 3 eye sockets instead of 2, the third one situated above the other ones, right in the middle of its forehead. Its canines were also more prominent and heavy than that of a human. The lower jaw of the skull was missing, and it was from there that the 7 gigantic tentacles protruded. Surprisingly, looking at the tentacles themselves did not have the same sickening effect on Sunny. With a sense of dark astonishment, he realized that the horror of the depths was using the terrible skull as a shell, hiding inside of it like a weak and vulnerable sea creature would, only, of course, nothing weak or vulnerable would have ever survived the corruption of these ancient bones. In fact, he could see the black oily flash bulging from the dark chasms of the skull's 3 cavernous eye sockets. In a flash of lightning, Sunny noticed that the tentacles were moving, coiling themselves around the arm of the stone colossus. 3 of them were heavily damaged, but the remaining 4 were still full of unimaginable power. Their combined strength was more than enough to shatter the ancient stone. Despite the fact that his arm was already starting to crack, the colossus seemed indifferent to the devastating embrace of the abyssal creature. What is he doing? As if answering his question, the dark sea suddenly surged and split apart, releasing the stone giant's other arm from its cold depths. With rivers of black water streaming from it, the hand of the colossus slowly rose, reaching all the way into the raging skies. The hurricane winds broke against it, powerless to move the arm of the colossus even by a centimeter. The hammer gripped in his hand was suddenly enveloped in a ghostly blue glow. No, it wasn't really a glow. In were arcs of electricity running all over its surface. They were the harbingers of. Sunny's eyes widened. In the next moment, a bolt of lightning connected the hammer to the skies. And then another, and another. Dozens of lightnings landed on the stone hammer in short succession, the roar of thunder almost shattering the whole world. Enveloped in the raging shroud of electricity, the ancient stone heated and turned incandescently bright, emanating a furious orange glow. For a moment, everything was still. And then, with the same calm indifference, the colossus brought his burning hammer down and delivered a devastating blow to the abhorrent skull. The beak of the hammer easily shattered the ancient bone and sank deep into the flesh of the horror hiding within. Sunny stared, paralyzed by awe. But in the next moment, he was thrown back by a terrible, ear-piercing, cacophonous wail. That wail was like nothing that a living being should ever have been able to produce, and much louder than even the deafening thunder tearing the raging skies. It came from the dweller of the depth, whose body was deeply wounded by the stone colossus. Peering at it, Sunny saw a vast wave of dark blood gush from the terrible wound delivered to the abyssal creature. No, not blood. It was something different. What flowed from the body of the horror of the depths was nothing but pure darkness. And the wall of it was heading right for them. Suddenly, Sunny was overwhelmed by a sense of mortal danger. What? To the rest of the cohort, the darkness spilling from the terror's body must have looked no different from the tenebrous mass of storm clouds that surrounded them, the black surface of the sea, or even the fetid blood of the giant locusts that they had slain earlier. But Sunny, who could see through any shadow, knew instantly that it was not the same. Because his gaze could not penetrate the lightless, undulating surface of it at all. Somehow, he was certain that if that darkness touched their bodies, all of them would be done for, doomed to a fate 100 times worse than death. The kind of fate he couldn't even conceive of, let alone imagine. Twisting his body, Sonny opened his mouth and screamed as loud as he could. Neph. Light. There was no more than a second left before the wave of darkness washed over them. If Changing Star was late even by a moment or wasted time thinking over his words and deciding whether she should listen to him. But she didn't. As soon as Nephi's heard the unreserved panic in Sonny's voice, she instantly summoned her flames and channeled them into her sword. A blinding white radiance suddenly enveloped the cohort, pushing the blackness of the storm away. When the wave of true darkness that flowed from the abyssal creature's wound touched the pure light, it simply ceased to exist, disappearing like a vestige of nightmare in the brightness of the day. Sonny exhaled and fell to the stones, drained of all strength. Glancing forward, he saw the ancient Colossus remove his hammer and indifferently drop the harrowing giant skull back into the surging waters of the cursed sea. The black tentacles weakly convulsed and unwrapped themselves from his arm, disappearing into the waves a few moments later. Without paying them any attention, the ancient statue lowered the hammer and continued its march south. It was as if nothing had happened. Sonny gritted his teeth and gathered whatever endurance he had left to grab onto the stone saint once again. The storm was still not over. However, somehow, it didn't seem as frightening and dangerous anymore. Indeed, nothing else happened to them. Hours later, the raging winds grew weaker, and the torrent of rain slowly turned into a light drizzle. The veil of tenebrous clouds was slowly torn apart, and the rays of sunshine shone through the tears. The storm was over. Lying on the cold stone surface, Sonny stared at the sky and grimaced. Comparatively safe, my ass.